Do you feel a shiver up your spine from fear? Yes, it's another story from the Nightshade diary. You know what that means. Check under the bed and make sure no one or nothing is there. Is the closet door securely shut? Then leave your disbelief behind. Amp up your imagination and hang on tight for another ride into terror and mystery. And like all good horror stories, just imagine it's a dark and stormy night. And remember, screaming like a little girl is permitted. The Crimson Complex by G. Fleming Roberts. It was not impulse that made Dorothy Fane bring her roadster to a sliding stop at the corner of 8th Street. Dorothy Fane never acted on impulse. Being beautiful, she had no motive for developing the vivacity that is supposed to attract men. She thought and moved slowly and accurately. Her emotions were as enduring as a Sunday in July, and as warm. Only Dorothy Fane knew why she tooted her horn invitingly as Detective Sergeant Carey stepped from the curb at 8th Street corner. And Dorothy never told. "I'm going out to Banmar." "If you are Mr. Carey," she called. Then she smiled enticingly. She always smiled that way. Jim Carey was of one color, red-brown hair and eyes. He always wore red-brown clothes and polished red-brown shoes. He approached the car cautiously, for he was always cautious. "It's Miss Fane." He lifted his red-brown hat, a thing almost unheard of among the men of the homicide squad. But then Carey had not served his apprenticeship on the traffic force. "Of course I'd be delighted for the lift. I wanted to get out to the hospital as soon as possible." He sat there, stiffly on the edge of the cushions. A red-brown cigar, unlighted, was fastened between his clean white teeth. The girl meshed the gears and raced the Mack truck for the inner traffic belt. "Terrible, isn't it, Mr. Applelard's death?" she said. "Yes," said Carey, then with his usual caution, "murder is always terrible. And when I think that he was a patient, it may ruin the future of the hospital. A patient murdered in his bed." A little shudder passed over the girl. "Yes," Carey said again. "You have every interest in the hospital, haven't you, Miss Fane? Not only as chief of nurses, but also because of the young research sensation, Dr. Trenton?" "No. You have me confused with Nurse Daniels. She is Dr. Trenton's fiancée." She ran a red traffic signal. Carey apologized for his blunder. "It is unfortunate, too. I mean that Miss Daniels is under considerable suspicion." It was more than suspicion, but Carey was cautious. "No!" exclaimed the girl. Carey nodded. "You see, she administered the hypodermic that killed Appelard. She used something that caused the old man's blood to clot in his blood vessels. Internal suffocation, I suppose you'd say." "Intravascular clotting," the nurse corrected. "Yes, I heard that Dr. Trenton's new blood-clotting substance, synthetic cephalin, he calls it, had been substituted. But I can't conceive of Miss Daniels. You see," Carey explained, "someone entered Dr. Trenton's lab and took enough of that synthetic stuff from the vial in his desk to make the injection. It was deliberately substituted for the hypodermic prescribed by Dr. Allen. I've not established a motive as yet. It might be that Miss Daniels wanted to prove the worth of her affianced discovery. Then there is one more." Carey was about to say that he made one more important discovery, but the nurse interrupted. "But surely it is an awful fuss to make over an old man who would have died in a few years anyway." It was the first time Dorothy had said this. She had thought of it several times before. Now that she had said it, she was glad. It sounded like a sort of defense for Margaret Daniels. It was always humane to defend the guilty, even though she hated Margaret Daniels as passionately as she loved Dr. Ralph Trenton. "The law never considers whether or not a person is too old to live," said Carey. A siren screamed at the rear wheel of Dorothy's flying car. A motorcycle drove her to the curb. She pulled up sharply. "Say, young woman, who do you think you are? That's the third time this week you've run through that traffic light. Think they're put there?" He saw Carey. He saluted stiffly. "Sorry, Sergeant, I didn't recognize you. I'll be more careful after this." "I would," said Carey sternly. "You may go on, Miss Fane." Some of these traffic officers are half blind, I believe. Dorothy hurried her car forward. That one especially has it in for me, she laughed. He will have it that my meager earnings are consumed in paying fines for passing red lights. But you were saying? Carey opened his mouth and shut it quickly. Some other time, Miss Vane, he said. Here's the hospital. If you'll just let me out in front, I have a few things to do, but I'll see you later. That will be nice, said the girl. She offered one of her lovely smiles. Carey's cheeks were susceptible, a crimson to the eyes. Dorothy Fane would have given a good deal to know just what Carey had discovered. As a chief nurse, she felt that she had a right to know everything that went on at the hospital. It was with the idea of pumping Ralph Trenton that she went to the laboratory before going to her desk. Softly on her rubber-heeled shoes, she entered the lab. Ralph was at his desk. His hands covered his face. His curly hair straggled over his fingers. Ralph, I can't tell you how sorry I am about all this. Ralph started at the sound of her voice. He looked up. His eyes were haggard and sleepless. It's all right, Dorothy, he said weakly. We all know that Margaret is incapable of such a thing. We simply have to prove that to our thick-headed Irishman. You know, Ralph, I'll do anything I can. Dorothy seated herself on the corner of Trenton's desk. She placed a cool white hand over his hot, moist fist. It seemed but a friendly gesture. Trenton noticed the coolness and whiteness of her hand. He looked into her face. Of course you will. You're a real friend, Dorothy. More than that. She would have been much more than that. Her blood raced madly. Her eyes entrapped Ralph's eyes and bathed them in dark blue depths. Phantom wires that enmeshed the nurse and doctor were broken by the sound of shoes clicking in the corridor. Sergeant Carey entered wrapped in a cloud of cigar smoke. I've made a very important discovery, Dr. Trenton. He paused in the doorway. Dorothy slipped from the desk. Trenton collected his wits. You seem to be full of important discoveries today, said the doctor sarcastically. Carey crossed the room and seated himself uninvited at Trenton's desk. He brought a small vial sealed with crimson wax from his pocket. He tapped the vial with his pencil. I'm returning your stuff that causes blood clotting in the veins. And kills. I haven't been able to discover why the murderer sealed this vial with red wax, when you, Dr. Trenton, say that you left it sealed with green wax. Trenton shrugged his shoulder. Carelessly, he said, It is all simple enough. A mere oversight. There were sticks of red, blue, and green wax on my desk. The murderer simply picked up the wrong one. Carey was drawing triangles on the desk pad. Suddenly his eyes jabbed at Trenton. Or perhaps it was only a neat bit of fabrication designed to draw my attention from you, Dr. Trenton. The doctor flushed angrily. He wanted to say something brilliant and biting, but his lips became dry. I'd like to speak to you in private, Doctor. Carey dropped his pencil on the desk and got up. Dorothy started to leave the room. You remain here, Miss Vane. I'll just step into the hall with Dr. Trenton. Once in the hall, Carey seized Trenton by the arm. The discovery that I've just made, Dr. Trenton, is that you are sole beneficiary by Mr. Applelard's will. He was your uncle. Trenton shrugged his shoulders. I've been aware of that for some time. Then why didn't you tell me? Carey snapped. But don't answer. It was because someone who loves you had a motive for killing Appelard in order to marry you. You are now a very rich man, you know. Ralph flamed. That isn't true. Why are you so persistent? Margaret couldn't do such a thing. Why, haven't I a stronger motive? Carey nodded shortly. You have indeed. I'll just make note. His hand went to his pocket. My pencil. I left it in your desk. Wait here, Doctor. Carey turned on his polished heels and re-entered the laboratory. Nurse Fane, he called from the door. Will you please bring me my pencil, the green one, on the desk in front of you? Certainly, Sergeant. The girl smiled as she extended the pencil to him. Isn't that a pretty shade of green, Miss Fane? He held the pencil almost lovingly in his hand. The girl smiled again, still her enticing smile. Carey stepped suddenly forward. His eyes sparkled with strange red lights. His two hands closed over the girl's shoulders. His lips came so close to her ear that they brushed a wisp of her hair. He whispered, Miss Fane, you were the one who substituted the poison for the hypodermic before Miss Daniels administered it. I arrest you for the murder of Gregory Applard. You killed him because you hated Margaret Daniels, because you wanted Dr. Trenton for yourself, because you wanted to marry into the Applard fortune. And I have the proof. The nurse stepped quickly backward. Still Carrie held her by the shoulders. What do you mean? Simply that my pencil isn't green, it's red. The traffic light this morning was also red. The wax you sealed Dr. Trenton's little bottle with was also red. I mean that you are red and green colorblind, Miss Vane. The girl sank limply onto a laboratory stool. A sudden change came over her face. She had become so hideous in those few seconds that passing her hand over her face she could feel her ugliness. A Dead Clue by David Nowinson. There was a timid knock upon the door. People who came to visit Neil Sperry didn't usually knock. They walked right in, and if they weren't welcome, they were carried out. Again a timid knock. Neil Sperry looked down the length of his cigar and grinned. There was only one man who would knock. "Come in," Nails yelled. Young Roland Curtis slid hesitantly into the unprepossessing place. The room reeked with submerged fumes of cheap tobacco and cheaper liquor. The one electric light placed near the door so Nails might see his visitors before they saw him was covered with dust, cast a wan yellow light as if it too felt sick in that foul atmosphere. These things young Curtis sensed before he saw the man who had sent for him. Nails Sperry sat on the bed, looking as hard as his name. He wore a pearl stick pin in his tie. Curtis noticed that. "Sit down and take a load off your dogs," Nails ordered. Curtis sat down upon the one chair in the room. The racketeer stared contemptuously at his guest for a moment. This tall young fellow with the blond hair and the sensitive mouth he had long ago set down as one of them pretty boys without guts. "Have a shot of shellac," he invited, dragging a bottle and 2 glasses from beneath the bed. He filled the glasses and gave one to Curtis. Curtis sniffed at it and shuddered. In the old days when his father was alive, there had been bourbon and champagne on the table. He passed the glass back to Sperry. "Thank you. Don't think I'd better. Too early in the day for me." Nails spat upon the floor and drank both glasses down. "Never too early for me," he said. "I don't know why you sent for me," ventured Curtis nervously. "But if it's money, I haven't a cent. You promised me the last time that you wouldn't ask for any more." Wait a minute," said Nails. "I'm not asking yet, see? So don't get wise, or tomorrow the rags will be yelling it all over town how your old man chiseled money from the bank before he bumped himself off." Young Curtis clenched his fist and said nothing. Too late he had discovered how little knowledge may be a very dangerous thing in the hands of a man like Sperry. "You still got that pearl necklace, ain't you?" shot out Nail suddenly. "Yes, but I'm not permitted to dispose of it, as I told you, the will." "Yeah, you solved out all that hooey before. Well, I don't want you to give me the pearls, see? I just want the use of 'em for a while." "But why?" A crafty look came over the racketeer's face. "Pearls come from oysters, don't they? Oysters are dumb, see? I'm going to send them pearls back to the oysters." "What do you mean?" "The rocks are insured, ain't they?" "Why, yes." "How much?" $50,000. The Runtamp Company. Nail Sperry licked his thin lips. 50 grand. Sweet, sweet. 50 grand from the oysters. His voice changed, took on a menacing note. "Now here's what I want you to do, see? Telephone your jeweler you're sending the pearls through the mail, registered letter, see? To get the cost fixed. Then you appoint me your agent to collect and handle all your insurance, see? That's all. I do the rest." "But the pearls," protested Curtis weakly. "You scram home and get 'em for me. I'll give 'em back in 3 days. Might even give you a cut on my take." "But how?" "That's something you and get hep to," said Nails. "Ever see Mickey Mouse?" "Of course, why?" "Good guy to watch," said Sperry in a tone of dismissal. "Now, scram, and cart the rocks right up." When Roland Curtis returned, Nail Sperry ran his hands covetously over the gleaming pearl necklace. Then he handed Curtis a thick brown envelope. "What's in it?" Curtis inquired. "That's your pearls, see?" Nails leered. You'll have that letter registered, and you'll send it to your jeweler. Don't try to open it because I know how I fixed it up, and you'll screw the works if you fool around, see? Just phone the jeweler and send it right out. In 3 days, you get your pearls, and I get my 50 grand, see? Roland Curtis didn't see, but he said nothing. It's foolproof, this scheme, boasted Sperry. It took some work in the old noodle. Now do what I told you. The blond young man left the room for the second time that morning. Curtis wanted to open that envelope. A nameless fear stopped him. He wasn't afraid for himself. For Nails to expose what he had threatened, however, besmirching his dead father's name, seemed to Curtis the rankest kind of sacrilege. The envelope, he thought, was rather thin to hold anything almost as valuable as the necklace. There was something soft inside, as if rolled in cotton. He wondered. At home, Curtis phoned his jeweler, as Nails had instructed. He did something Nails had not instructed to. He placed the envelope under a large, unabridged dictionary to fasten it so that an address might be written more easily. And he signed not his own, but Sperry's name and address before having the letter registered and mailed. There were three in the delegation that visited Nail Sperry's place next day. Young Roland Curtis led the way. Admitted he injured, followed by the other two men. Sperry's face darkened as he saw them. "What's the big idea?" he snarled. "Who are these guys?" "Sorry," said Curtis apologetically. "Awful rude of me. This is Postal Inspector Danny, and this is Federal Agent Smith." The men bowed. Nail Sperry scowled. He didn't appreciate good manners. "Well, what do they want here?" "It's about that letter you sent, Mr. Sperry," said Federal Agent Smith, who was a mild little man with sandy hair. "Me? You're screwy. I didn't send no letter," snarled the racketeer. "It had your name and address on it," said the mild-mannered Smith. "And besides, what about San Francisco?" "Well, what about it?" "In 1929, said Smith reminiscently, "a similar situation occurred in Frisco with a diamond ring. An insurance company there paid you $4,000 because the letter in which you'd mailed the ring for repairing arrived with a hole in the envelope, explaining the ring's absence. Very neat. There was no substantial evidence at the time, Mr. Nail Sperry, but we've kept you in mind." The racketeer edged towards the bureau. "Keep away from there," ordered Smith. A gun flashed in his hand. "You want to give me a chance to finish my story. Inspector Danny will take care of your gun." Inspector Danny opened the bureau drawer and obliged. "This letter that should have contained the pearl necklace," continued Smith, "arrived this morning at the Townsend Jewelers. Oddly enough, it contained a dead mouse." "Dead?" cried Nails hoarsely. "Yes, it had smothered somehow. Strange, wasn't it? Normally a live mouse gnaws its way out of a letter in a hurry." "Mickey Mouse would have done a better job," contributed Curtis. The racketeer wheeled upon him. "Smart, ain't you?" "Maybe you won't be so smart when I get done talking about what your old man—" "Where you're going," interrupted the federal agent softly. "You won't have a chance to talk for a long time. Uncle Sam will see to that. And people don't trust convicts these days." Inspector Danny, who had been rummaging about the bureau, handed Curtis a string of pearls now. "Thanks," said Curtis, as they led the prisoner away. "You know they say that pearls come from oysters." "That's right," agreed Federal Agent Smith. "But oysters are pretty dumb." Dead Man's Drop by R. Van Taylor. The sound of the door buzzer didn't merely awaken Carl Munson. It jerked him to an upright position in his sweat-soaked bed. Shading his eyes from the sunlight which streamed through the windows, he glanced across at the clock on the dresser. It was 10 minutes after 3. Groggily, he slipped into a robe. At the dresser, he ran a comb through his thinning hair. Then, turning slowly, he walked with hesitant steps into the living room of the shabby apartment. The buzzer beckoned again. Munson's hand reached slowly for the latch. Several distinct thoughts filled his mind as he wavered indecisively. First, it might be that the caller was Middleton. Middleton was the man at the employment agency. As much as Munson disliked the prospect of work, he had gone there several days ago and dropped the word that he was open for the right kind of position. The kind that paid 10 times more than a man was worth and would offer an opportunity to knock down plenty on the side. But it wouldn't be Middleton. He'd use the phone. Second, it was possibly the landlord. Damn him. Munson had told that fat fool that he would pay his rent in a few days. These money leeches would suck every ounce of blood from a man's body if corpuscles came in the shape of dollar signs. The buzzer still vibrated in its irritating, impersonal manner. Then, it could be Barrett. Munson touched his warped forehead with trembling fingers, trying to erase those agonizing memories. Memories of his deal with Barrett and the golden Buddha and a woman's body at the bottom of the Pacific. But this couldn't be Barrett. No, he was still in Honolulu. Cautiously, Munson released the hatch and opened the door. It was Barrett. Munson cringed, expecting his body to be filled with the ripping deadly slugs from a pistol. But nothing so fatal took place, only something more puzzling. Barrett stood in the doorway with a good-natured smile on his fleshy face. His 6-foot frame was expensively dressed, and beneath his arm he carried a tin box. "Well, aren't you going to ask me in?" Barrett said. Munson was completely puzzled. He stepped back quickly. "Yes," he said. "Yes, of course. Been a long time, Barrett." "Not so long. Only a year." Barry cast an uncritical eye around the room. Munson pulled the edge of his robe tighter over his chest and silently cursed the ragged furniture, dirty ashtrays, and messy floor. Munson stammered, "I'm glad to see you. You're looking good." "Thanks," Barrett replied, extending his hand to shake. Munson took the hand. A strange vibration shot up his arm. He jerked away rapidly. Barrett broke into a fit of laughter and at the same time withdrew a small gadget from the palm of his hand. He said, "It gives you quite a scare, doesn't it?" Munson flushed. "You and your damn jokes. You never will outgrow that kid stuff, will you, Barrett?" Then he added awkwardly, "How about a drink?" "Sure. Let's have one for old time's sake." A cabinet stood against the wall. Munson opened it and took out several bottles. Every one of them was empty. "Have you been drinking lately?" Barrett asked. "No, it's just that I need to go to a store. I think there's another bottle in the bedroom. I'll go get it." Munson went into the bedroom. He moved quietly to the dresser and slipped open the top drawer. He pulled out a .32 revolver, dropped it into the pocket of his robe, and stuffed a handkerchief on top of it. Immediately he felt a sensation of ease replace his nervous tension. Grabbing the fifth from the nightstand, Munson returned to the living room. "How long are you going to be here?" he asked, pouring a couple of shots. "That depends. I came over about 3 weeks ago on the Matsonia, and I've been staying with some friends out near Stanton Cliffs. Nice place, the Cliffs. I go there almost every day. Look out over the Pacific and listen to Mildred's voice. It comes with the breakers." Munson swallowed hard. "How did you know I was here?" Barrett grinned. "Mildred told me. You thought I was going to kill you, didn't you?" The color drained from Munson's face. He set the drinks down and turned to Barrett. His hand dropped into the pocket of his robe. His eyes suddenly got narrow. Barrett continued. "Wouldn't I have grounds for killing you, partner? In case you're rusty, let me review the deal for you. A year ago, you sold me your half of our clothing store in Honolulu. I paid you $5,000 then with the agreement that I would pay another $5,000 in a year. When you left for the States, you took something besides the money. You took my wife, but Mildred never lived to reach this country." "I didn't have anything to do with that," Munson protested. "She followed me. I didn't know she was on the ship until we were at sea. I told her that she had made a serious mistake, that she should go back. I thought it was all settled. Then she vanished." Munson picked up his glass and downed the whiskey. Then he added, "The ship's log reads that she committed suicide by jumping overboard. That's a lie. You killed her, just as I should kill you. It was a suicide. You drove her to it. She couldn't stand you and your damn practical jokes. You're always embarrassing her and her friends. She would have gone with anyone to get away from you." Barrett shrugged. "He's getting excited," he said quietly. "Hashing over the past will gain neither of us anything besides. I'm here to pay you off." "You mean you've brought the $5,000 that you still owe me?" Barrett said, "I failed in Honolulu, went broke. For some reason, I couldn't keep my mind on the store. Now there's only one thing of value I have left. It's something you've always wanted and tried to get from me many times. It's easily worth $5,000. In this box, which I brought with me, You have what is coming to you. You don't mean the golden Buddha. After I'm gone, you can open it and find out. Is it the Buddha? Munson couldn't help it if his voice sounded greedy. The idol would bring enough money to get him out of the hole. He would get out of this rat trap, go to some small town, and start life over again. I didn't say what was in it, Barrett answered. That's for you to find out. You fool. Munson snatched the box from Barrett. He started to open it. Don't, Barrett shouted. The warning paralyzed Munson for a second. He laid the box down suspiciously and looked at Barrett, who was now on his feet, backing towards the door. What's in that box? Munson demanded. He jerked a pistol from his robe and leveled it at Barrett. Tell me! Barrett reached for the doorknob. You wouldn't shoot me, he said. And by the way, your hand is trembling. I believe you'd miss me even if you did pull the trigger. You haven't got the guts to be really bad. Damn you, Barrett. Tell me, what's in that box? Munson was pointing his gun at space. Barrett had slipped through the door and silently disappeared down the hall. Munson's arm, which was still pointing the gun, collapsed against his side. Slowly, his head turned back to the room, and his bewildered gaze fell upon the box. Munson stood still and thought for a moment. If he had not known Barrett so well, he would have gone to the box and opened it. But Barrett was a very clever man. It would be just like him to turn this whole thing into a big but fatal joke. Barrett could have easily rigged a bomb in the box or anything else that would do away with him. He wouldn't travel all the way from Honolulu to give him the golden Buddha, give it to his worst enemy. The more Munson thought about it, the more he was convinced that Barrett had something up his sleeve. Carefully picking up the small heavy box, he went into the bathroom and started filling the tub with water. As soon as the tub was full, he would submerge it. Then, if it were a bomb, it would be rendered harmless. And if it turned out to be the Buddha, a little water wouldn't hurt it. While the tub was filling, another thought crossed his mind. What if the water was just the thing to set it off? What if he started to soak the box and then the whole thing blew up in his face? No, he wouldn't use water on the box. A sensation of helplessness passed through him as he took it back into the living room. His eyes went to the window and a smile formed on his drawn lips. There was a way of getting rid of it, he thought. Why not toss the thing out of the window and be done with it? Rapidly he walked to the window. He grasped the box with both hands and started to throw it. In his mind he could clearly see it exploding on the pavement below. Explosion? No, Munson didn't want an explosion here. It would be an investigation. The police would come. He didn't want to see them. Perspiration popped out on his face as he tried to think. Maybe he was jumping at conclusions, but he had to be sure. How could he? The telephone rang, and Munson flinched. The sudden noise had frightened him, and his heart was pumping furiously. He set the box down cautiously and went to the phone. Picking up the receiver, he mumbled, Yes? It was Barrett's voice, and he said, Is that you, Munson? Yes? Where are you? I'm in a bar a couple of blocks down the street. Then he chuckled and added, You haven't opened the box yet, have you? No. How did you know that? Take all the time you want, Munson. Think it over real carefully. Think about everything. Barrett, you've got to tell me. Barrett? Barrett? The phone was dead. Munson grabbed the telephone directory and flipped through the pages. There was only one bar nearby, the Black Cat. He found the number and dialed the phone. A nasal voice answered. Black Cat, bartender speaking. Munson said, There was a man who used your phone a moment ago. Is he still there? Nope, he just left. Could you catch him for me? It's important. Look, mister, I'm here by myself. I can't leave. Did he say where he was going? Munson asked, like a plain damn fool. People don't tell me their business, the bartender replied impatiently. Munson dropped the receiver back into the hook. Where was Barrett going? Where? Staten Cliffs. Of course, that was it. He had mentioned staying with some friends who lived near there, and that he went to the cliffs every day. But maybe Barrett had given him this information purposely. Maybe it was a trap. And Barrett wanted to lure him there to kill him in case this infernal machine failed. Munson's hand tightened on the revolver in his pocket. No, If it were a trap, he'd not be the one who would die. Hurriedly, he formed a plan. He would take the box and drive out to the cliffs. If Barrett was there, he would force him to tell him about the box. But if everything failed, he would hurl the thing into the sea. It was an ideal place. The cliff stood in an isolated location along the coast. If it were a bomb and exploded, no one would be the wiser. An hour later, Munson pulled his blue coupe to a stop at the edge of Stanton Cliffs. It was a barren, desolate place where the earth dropped off into the endless depths of the sea. Looking behind him, he could see speeding cars on the highway some 300 yards away. At this time, he was the only one there. Munson felt miserable because he had misjudged Barrett's next move. He was filled with indecision. Finally, he came to a conclusion. He'd get rid of that damn box and have it off his mind. Cautiously, he removed the box from its secure riding place in the seat of the car. He walked to the edge of the cliffs and peered over the dizzy heights. 200 feet down the vertical wall of jagged stone, he could see the surf pounding viciously upon the narrow gray beach. It was a long, long drop. He tossed the box over the edge and ran back towards the car. Munson heard the tin box strike stone. There were a series of clashing sounds as it bounced about on the rocks, but no explosion. Frowning, he walked back to the edge of the cliffs and looked down. He gaped as a tiny brilliant highlight from yellow metal glistened on the narrow strip of rock and sand below. It was the golden Buddha. He lowered himself over the edge and started the perilous descent. All he could think about was that idol. It was his. It was money. It was everything he needed. Halfway down, he began to grow tired. His hands were slippery from sweat, and his aching feet could no longer find toeholds in the perpendicular mass of solid rock. He could neither go up nor down. He became frantic. Then he heard the motor of an approaching car. He called for help. He yelled for it at the top of his voice. The distorted shape of a man appeared at the top and gazed languidly at Munson. It was Barrett. "Help me!" Munson cried. "Why should I?" Barrett said. His voice seemed far, far away. "I'll confess," Munson called back. "I killed Mildred. Killed her because she wouldn't have me. After we were on the ship, she told me that you were the one she loved. That she was insane to have left you. She was going back to Honolulu as soon as we docked. I killed her and threw her body overboard. Now help me." Barrett stood firm. "It's all a gag, isn't it?" Munson asked frantically. "It's another one of your jokes. You aroused my suspicions about the box. You knew I'd try to get rid of it. You've had your laugh. Please." Barrett didn't move. Munson screamed. "I can't hold much longer. Do something." "I've already done it," Barrett answered. "I've paid you off. Only that's not the real Buddha down there. It's just a cheap imitation, like yourself." And Barrett left. And Munson's fingers began slipping, slipping, slipping.